Hello, everyone. We are just waiting for one or two more panelists to get on in, and then we will get started. Give us just one or two more minutes, and thanks for joining. All right, as the rest of our panelists jump in, what I wanted to do is give everybody a quick introduction, do a little bit of housekeeping so we know how things are going to work, and then we'll jump right on into the panel. So to begin, I wanted to introduce all of our panelists today. We have a very talented group of people here to talk about some subjects I think they're all very passionate about and very timely in terms of what's happening in the industry today. So we have Nathan Thomas, who is the Senior VP of Ad Ops and Platform Solutions here at Playwire. Leroy Holland is our VP of Programmatic Direct Sales. We have Justin Barton, who is the SVP of Digital Strategy and Partnerships at Black Enterprise. Carlos Sanchez, who is the Associate Director of DEI at Starcom, and Carol Castillo-Bruscher, who is the Senior Director of Multicultural Strategy at OMD. So please take some time to welcome all of these guests, and I want to take the time to thank you all for participating. I know you're all very busy, and so this is a welcome change for us to get all access to all of your time. A little bit of housekeeping. I want this to make sure that we're continuing to keep it very discussion oriented. So participants, if you have questions during the entirety of the broadcast, feel free to throw them in the questions or the chat pane. I will keep an eye on that and make sure that we are addressing them as they come up. And if there are things that don't quite fit into the discussion flow as they pop up, we'll save some time at the end for some questions from everyone. So don't hesitate to jump in if you have anything you'd like to ask. With that, I'm going to introduce the start of our questions. So we're going to lead off with why DE&I in audiences matter. And so what I really wanted to do is focus towards the agencies and brands first, as that's where most of the push for this is coming from, and ask essentially, what are brands and agencies looking for in this regard, and how does audience reach as a really specific area of DE&I kind of fit into the wider picture of overall DE&I initiatives? So Carlos and Carol, I wanted to really open it up to the two of you first, as you guys are on the ends that are pushing these initiatives forwards, and see if any of you can share some of the reasonings behind this initiative and why we are even here today to talk about it.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of different things that go into this. One, just thankful to be here with you guys today. Glad to be with this esteemed panel. You guys are all excellent. But I think that I would actually push on that yeah, there are advertisers and brands looking for this, but I think it's really precipitated by the need that's coming from consumers. Have you seen, as of late, consumers are all the more informed, all the more aware, more so than they've ever been. And I think that the, access to tech and what tech means and the understanding of, something like AI, right, which was not common speak several years ago, is something that everybody understands. Algorithms, right? It's something that everyone is now becoming more and more abreast to. So I'd say that, yeah, while brands are looking for this change to be more inclusive as it pertains to their audience reach, I do think that also comes from a demand that starts with the consumers first, both as it relates to their interest and what it is they're looking to see in representation, but also as it relates to, demographic changes that are kind of proliferating throughout this country. So I think that it really all starts with the consumers, which is what is kind of, necessitating this shift from brands, pubs, agencies alike. And I just want to kind of say that, while part of it is coming from the marketer side, a lot of it is also really kind of, the catalyst for change is always the consumers, I think.
Awesome. Carol, would you add anything to that?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the beginning of the question. So
you bet. Really what we're focused on is why we're here today from the perspective of brands and agencies. Why is this an important initiative? Why do we really need to be able to reach very diverse audiences?
I mean, I would say the first thing is if you care about your business and the future of your business and having it be, a growth, a place of growth and expansion, then that's not something that you can ignore at all. I mean, the population trends from a very flawed census, give you you know, an indication of where things are going, knowing that that's severely undercounted.
Right.
I think that gives you even more, like, you know, vigor to like go through the steps to correct that, as well as acknowledging that that is your place of growth. And if you're not speaking to, you know, your audience in that way, then you're not really connecting with them. And the flaws in the data are really kind of interrupting that connection point. So that's why I think it's extremely important that we're here talking about it today.
Yeah,
So
I just
thank
want
you
to
for putting this together.
Yeah, and I just want to piggyback on one point you brought up, Carol, which is we are such a data-driven industry, but with such pronounced flaws in the data in of itself, the projections of this being a, multicultural dominant marketplace by 2030, I think, to your point around those gaps, those holes, it really just kind of should invigorate us to assume that that is a severe under projection, which could mean this could happen even faster. So to your point around brands caring about their business, it's imperative that we reposition, re-strategize, and really rethink the way we invest. Right now, this is the exact moment. I mean, honestly, the exact moment was before, but if you haven't caught on to the wave now, you are behind the eight ball. But there is still time, and I think that it's an important call out that we use data all the time, but we're not necessarily as attuned to calling out the flaws in it.
Awesome. So Leroy, do you have anything that you'd add? I know this is a big point of passion for you in general.
Yeah, for sure. I'd probably piggyback on what Carlos said, right? The browning of America is a very real phenomenon. And, for me being on the sales side, more so than on the brand side. So I get to talk to Carlos and Carol and these guys. But I think 2020 was kind of the galvanizing summer, right? We were all locked in our houses with COVID happening. You had a racial reckoning happening in this country with everything that happened in Minneapolis and Louisville and all of that, right? So I think people actually had time behind the screen. So it was imperative that marketers, once they started talking to the consumer again, that they had to reach a diverse consumer, right? Because take for instance in Minneapolis, you had right at Target's doorstep, right? Target was one of the first brands that came out and was like, we're going to get behind this, right? And then closely followed by P&G and Unilever and everyone talking about how they were going to earmark all this money for DE&I. And I think it's important not only in that moment, but it was something that was always needed in marketing. And so you're just starting to see the proliferation of it. So I'm ecstatic that it's happening. I've been in marketing for about 15 years now. So, being African American myself, I was always wondering, when is the advertiser going to talk directly to me? And I think that is actually starting to happen right now.
And Justin, I know we're going to get to some of the points a little bit later on in the discussion that are really publisher focused, but I imagine you have some thoughts on, why this is so important of a discussion today, and hearing that we're even potentially behind the eight ball if we haven't started thinking about it even before today. Would love to hear, from the publisher perspective, what you think the importance of all of this is.
Yes, certainly. From the publisher perspective, Black Enterprise has been around for 52 years and focusing on the Black African American audience, empowerment, both financial, education, business, and now social justice. And we're trying to push towards underrepresented groups. And like Leroy was saying, coming into March of 2020, when we all got locked down, and then what happened with George Floyd, there's been a significant focus on DEI and underrepresented groups. And from the brand side and advertisers and agencies really looking to place dollars in publishers that focus on that. So at Black Enterprise, we always found it to be important to have a larger voice, to be an authentic voice for diverse audiences. And during that time in 2020, around the summer, we made an extreme investment in journalism and hired over 10 writers to increase our reach. So we went from 400,000 UVs to the last two comp scores came out, and we've been at essentially 13 million UVs. So we've gone, there's been a focus on it on our part and on the brand side and agency side to really move towards diverse audiences, to super serve them with the content, be trusted voices, but at the same time advertise towards them as well, because this is like everybody's saying, a demographic on the rise. And as a publisher, we want to make sure that we're serving them with authentic content that reaches them that could be trusted, not necessarily just the mainstream media. Right.
Great, thank you. Well, a couple of comments set me right up for our next topic, so I should probably pay you guys for doing that. The segue was built in. What we really want to talk about now is what the current technology limitations are, what's making it so that we can't do this today. So essentially, what is the current state of the technology to support some of these initiatives, what is and isn't possible in today's environment. And I know, Nathan, from our end, you can talk a lot about what we've looked at, but I would love to hear from the group as well, what they see and don't see in the existing technology today.
Yeah, no, happy to start this off. I've been in ad tech a long time, 14 years at this point. And before that, always interested in advertising. And, as much as we think, just like Carlos said earlier, how extremely advanced our targeting and reporting capabilities are, when it comes to DE&I efforts, there's a massive gap, right? And we really need to all come together collectively as an industry, publishers, advertisers, agencies, intermediaries like Playwire, and really solve this for everybody. Because one thing I wanted to point out, circling back to the beginning question, why should we do this, right? DE&I efforts, they're not some kind of extra thing that we should be doing on advertising. That's just advertising done right. I mean, if you're not reaching the population as it is the composition of the US, you're not reaching the consumer's rights, period, right? So I think we need to step back mindset wise, think of, we're doing some kind of extra favor to get better at targeting. No, it's just doing it right? And so I think when we acknowledge that there's this gap here, then we can really focus our energies on areas where we have deficiencies. Current state of ad tech, to just go back at that a little bit, I mean, standard forms of targeting, audience-wise, age, gender, things like that, household income, and so forth, they've been around for a while, but we all know that even that, which doesn't even take things like race or sexual orientation or disability or whatever have you, it's not good, right? I'm not going to sit here and say like, the industry is great at actually knowing who is a female or a male and what your age is. I mean, if you look at your own profile on some of the data vendors, you might appear as somebody completely different. Maybe that's good, I don't know. So, a lot of it is cookie based. A lot of it is, not first party data. If you have first party data, you're in a lucky position that you do have that and you have all those metrics that we are talking about here, great. I would like to talk to you. Most of the web does not. And so we're dealing with this cookie based data that's not really good already, and cookies are going away, right? So we not only need to think about DE&I efforts, but also think about the changing factors in cookies being sunsetted. How do we deal with that? Playwire is always thinking about that, including our DMP and DE&I efforts. So all of that tied together is very important. And then one last thing I would like to mention here that sometimes is glazed over is brand safety. It's actually a very concerning point to me when it comes to these efforts here, because I can't tell you how many block lists I've seen that actually block words like race, gay, Muslim, who knows what. So then your own agency efforts or advertiser efforts of actually reaching that audience might be prohibited right at the block list level and won't even run on the appropriate media because you're blocking articles about social issues or something like that, right? And that's totally backfires. It doesn't fund journalists that report on that, and it doesn't fund the creators and minority-owned businesses and the content they consume. And I'll stop here because I'm talking too much.
I think one thing I just want to chime in on is that I think you're absolutely right, Nathan. It's really just a perspective, right? And it goes back to asking a bigger question, which is how have we been doing it right? And I think in many instances, the answer is that we haven't been, right? Even the word blocklist, right? Understanding that there is a lot of points in which, while the intentionality isn't negative, but understanding how to interpret things from a tech perspective, just linguistically between whitelist, blacklist, using words like blocklist, understanding the implicit bias that comes into these moments of which tech has created these biases, right? And these gaps and these outages. And part of it is because they weren't built with intentionality to have representation, because the people who built them weren't representative of that population that we're trying to include. So I think it's really also about understanding how to reshift the way that we think about things, and not just solely understanding that the outages exclusively live on the tech in of itself. There are certainly outages to, we all can agree, but I do think some of it is also just framing, right? And understanding how to prioritize things. You know, Justin, you talked about it earlier with authenticity, right? Like if you think about, you know, the idea of advertisers not even taking the significance, or placing the significance on being able to speak to the Black community with an authentic voice, understanding that yes, there is a language connection between the white population and Black population, unlike the Hispanic population. But the problem is that there's still an authentic voice that needs to kind of proliferate. So I know that's not tech specific, but I do think the idea of the mentality shift does apply to the tech world as well. And I think it's something we have to all be cognizant of as we start to unpack these things that aren't necessarily just predicated on the deprecation of cookies.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Carlos, you and I, sorry, Nathan, real quick. Carlos, you and I have had that conversation, right? And I think we also need to educate our agency partners, right? When it comes to, if they want to reach a Black user, yes, there's a high probability that you're going to reach that Black user on Black Enterprise or Ebony or Jet, but also you can reach that user on a gaming site, right? Or you can reach that user on an entertainment site, because Black people still like music and they still like movies as well. So it's just really about, like, when an agency want to see the site list, they're expecting, if they're reaching African Americans or trying to, they want to see the list that has all Black publishers. And I think that, you know, we got to get them to kind of shift that focus as well and look at the data.
Well, I'll
Yeah.
step in there, Leroy, and say I don't want them to make that shift overall. And I think there's a reason behind that, is really because, you know, Black-owned media. So if you look at Black Enterprise, you mentioned Ebony, Essence, the Griot. You know, these sites, you know, we want to be able to fund these sites. We hire Black journalists, we hire, you know, Black product people, and it's important for us to, you know, reap the dollars from the agencies and the brands, you know, just because we want to keep this business going. We don't want to lose, you know, Black publications. And I think a lot of what we've seen in the past, and this has changed significantly since, I would say, George Floyd, is that people say, okay, I can reach you know, the Black audience on Complex, or I can reach them on ESPN or NBA.com. And we're saying, yes, that's true. You can target them there and then spend all your dollars with, you know, this mainstream media. But it's better and more beneficial to get the authentic voice from a Black source, and at the same time also help that Black source continue their business. So we've been pushing, you know, to make sure that we receive that spend. Obviously, from a tech standpoint, you know, we were talking about cookies and targeting. You know, we have all the capabilities, but what we see a lot of times from the agencies is they say, when working with Black publications, it's hard to scale, let's say, a PMP. So we want to continue to have relationships with the agencies and say, hey, we can do a programmatic guarantee. We can do different things to help scale that PMP, but just always on PMP doesn't always work. And if you're trying to put a whole bunch of attributes within the targeting and then, you know, target out to other, you know, mainstream media, which is nothing wrong with that. I love them, but it's better to come right directly to the source of, you know, Black-owned media, you know, Hispanic media, whatever it may be. Go right to those sources and try to spend dollars there. And that's what we try to push.
I agree with that 100%. And I think it's definitely a balance of two, you know, having, you know, the higher reach partners, you know, give you that part of the plan that you need. But it's also like double clicking on culture and using a Black enterprise to really come through with that message. That's gonna hit differently coming from your publication, you know, than from ESPN. That's just different, you know, mindset and environments. And I also very much agree on supporting, you know, minority-owned business, and taking a different approach to it, as far as it being, you know, straight up numbers and data. That's one part of it, but knowing that, you know, we are living in a flawed data, you know, ecosystem, it can't be the only way. Like, it can't be the only thing to pin success on. I mean, we have to get creative on what those things mean. I think success on Black enterprise means something very different than success on the Griot or success on the Weather Channel. Like, they're different vehicles and different ways to look at it, and they should be, you know, treated differently because they are different. and they offer something that's unique. So in that vein, there should be evaluated with another sense of filter through it, not just like, where's my delivery, where's my audience, what's my number? Like, it can't just be tied to the number.
Agreed.
So
I think that this,
go ahead, Carlos.
I think that this, I mean, we're talking about, you know, a societal issue that's taken place over, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of years at this point. So like, I think the idea, um, that we need to take in any application of this is just ampersand. It's and because we're unpacking so many things and there's never going to be a single solution. And I talk about it all the time internally or externally, you know, with you guys at Playwire. It's like this is a yes and. It's always an and because it's such a complex problem with so much historical behind it. It always has to be an and. And the other thing I wanted to piggyback on what you said, Carol, is it's absolutely correct with the data, not only just the outage and just looking at the numbers, but the numbers don't always tell that, you know, qualitative component. What's that resonance, right? Yeah, you can scale, but like, where is the resonance? How is it actually landing with people? And that's one of those things that the data can also, you know, hide.
For sure, I think that that's totally true, and those are one of the ways that I try to like help clients see, you know, the value through engagement and through comments, you know, the qualitative part of it that really can give you the proof of like, am I landing, or is my message getting through? Are people receiving it and evangelizing it? Because that's what you want, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah, I think you kind of have this trifecta, right? You have a contextual relevance, like the content on page is relevant. You have the ownership of the media, and then you have the audience, right? And they're all important in their own ways, and you just need to be factored in the right type of media plan. And then the last thing I would say, again, also not a tech problem per se, but just how does the ad look, right? Who is represented in the ad? Who is in the creative? I mean, I've read studies myself that showed that return on investments on creatives that were more inclusive or matching the actual audience composition performed better. It was like a Kantar study I read. So those are all things that we need to factor in that go beyond just pushing numbers and, you know, buttons on the back end for data.
Great point.
Well, we are definitely not ones to talk about problems without also talking about solutions. So this segues very nicely into our next topic is, you know, what is the industry doing to change this? What are we doing to solve these problems? How are we overcoming them? And I'm just going to piggyback the topic that keeps coming up over and over again, which is cookies and data privacy. And how does all of that layer into the solutions that are being brought to the table today? So, you know, Leroy and Nathan, I'll let you jump in, but I definitely want to hear from across the team. I know we're really excited about the things we're working on to solve this, but it is far larger than just us that's working on this problem. So I'd love to hear from across the board, everyone that is.
Nathan, shoot.
Oh, okay. I was going to give the other guys a chance here. Yeah, so I think that kind of goes well to what I said before, right? I don't think there's one solution, right? So you need to look at a lot of different layers from, again, like I said, the contextual data, the content of the site, the content of the articles, the ownership of the media, first party data, third party data, census data. You can run panels and surveys on your own users. So everything together really is what you need, I think, to go is just like Carlos said, it's an and and an and and an and. We're going to try this and this and this and this, just to really dial in our media, dial in our targeting, well knowing that it's imperfect at the moment and it's imperfect everywhere and nobody has a solution. And then as we do this, work with the established partners in the industry to actually also connect that to proper measurement, right? Because I often get data back on campaigns about our audience that I frankly just don't believe, right? Where, oh, your audience is XYZ. I'm like, that's kind of impossible. Like, I don't understand that. So I think we all need to work together. I think there needs to be a, you know, closer alignment from publishers to advertisers to you know, tech vendors, really kind of bringing that all together and kind of solving this problem here and making it go away, hopefully.
Yeah, I'll add to that as well, right? So I think the measurement piece is key. And the way I see it is DE&I will ultimately get treated like a CPG campaign, right? Where you're looking at like OTP and on target percentages and things like that, right? And we know there's a couple vendors out there that do it well. There's some vendors out there that don't do it so well. So I think as tech evolve around the measurement piece, because you know, again, outside of being on Justin's site, right? If you're trying to reach AA or being on, another site trying to reach Latinx or AAPI audience, it, you, really at the end of the day, it's about like, you can say I hit that audience, but if the agency says we measure you and you didn't hit that audience, right? It's what they say, and they're not going to give you additional budget for that, right? And so, as we look at, developing our own solution here at Playwire, I think, from the data standpoint, we have a ton of it. From a measurement standpoint, I think it's still kind of a work in progress, and we're looking at all different types. And we may even come up with something proprietary, or at least like a combination. But you've got some of the bigger vendors out there that are trying to solve for it right now. I'm not sure that, how far they are, but we'll keep iterating with them. And I think this whole entire process has to be iterative, right, as we develop a solution around it. And most of the agencies and brands that I'm talking to, they're willing to crawl, walk, and then run with us. And so I think that's going to be definitely, that patience is going to be needed as we look. And so I think, as we look to get that perfect trifecta of a solution, I think patience is going to be needed. But I think the measurement piece is going to be really, really key, because that's ultimately how you're going to be judged.
Yeah, I think that DE&I is a lens, right? And that it's a lens that we should look through and apply to all our applications, whether it be on the tech solution side, the creative side, all of those things. And I think that the idea of thinking of, DE&I outside of the context of it being a lens that's scalable and applicable to all of these different components does it a disservice, because the idea of equity comes from the lack of equity or inequity, right? And so we're talking about something that is being necessitated based off of harm, exclusion, all these things that have happened historically. And I think that the way that we need to think through the solution in order to get through them, whether it's tech or it's creative or whatever the case is that we have to be cognizant of the fact that there has been purposeful and or unintentional impacts that have come through people not being inclusive. And so as we think about all of these different touch points, we have to be really cognizant of our solutions being able to address that point of exclusion, and the idea of what Tom Burrell and Bob Johnson and all these guys were creating was because of there was no inclusion, and the only voice that could happen or be or could manifest itself was from one within one's own self. And I think we have to undo that learning and understanding that it's all of our responsibilities to cognizantly create touch points every day to get closer to these solutions in all of our respective disciplines.
Justin, I'd be very interested to hear, from the publisher side, what technological advances are you looking at to help, you pass the information you have on your audience up the chain, right? Like how are we starting that conversation? We've heard a lot from, how are we trying to get at an audience? Now, great, how do we know what that audience is definitely be interesting to hear what you're working on your end.
Yeah, so it's twofold. I'll start with the second half, which is I'm actually looking forward to the cookie apocalypse, because I see that as an opportunity for us to pull in more advertisers and brands out of the whole data targeted world into more contextual content that we have on our site. If you want to reach the Black audience, that's what we have. You're not going to try to reach it with some new cookie technology that might not make sense or might not work there. But at the same time, what we're doing is we're partnering with all the other vendors that are coming out there that are looking for the new solution in the cookieless world. So, we have all those tests set up, and we've been doing that over the last year or so. So we'll be prepared either way, but I'm hoping that it moves, everybody more to a contextual world where they're saying, hey, we would like to find this audience. We know this audience exists on your sites, and come to us and we can talk about that, and we can serve you and reach that audience that way. So that's what I'm looking forward to. But at the same time, I'm not, putting all my eggs in that basket. If there has to be some targeting, then, we're working with all the major players who are preparing for the cookie apocalypse right now.
Great. Well, I think this, oh, go right ahead.
Oh, no, I just wanted to add that I think the biggest thing that's happening now is awareness, and that people are having the conversation. And I think that that's happening, in strides across the agency. At least my particular agency, it's a conversation across every single client. A lot of them are, what are we doing? But they're asking that question, which is probably the most important one, just to have the awareness that you don't know and that you want to find out and you want to, contribute to the change. So I think that's probably the biggest, I think, headline, because that curiosity is going to fuel all these changes. And right when we're in the middle of like transitioning from a cookie existence into cookieless, and all of these conversations are happening of like, what is it going to look like, and how are we going to make this cookieless world work for everyone? I think that's really the opportunity to have these conversations be surrounded in all of those tech conversations, so that those are one and the same. It's not this and that. It's how are we solving for this holistically, so that our industry not only gets bigger with more diversity, but also serves, the population at large, because we're being mindful of it. So I think that's kind of the biggest change that I see. And I think that, yes, definitely 2020, like, rung the alarm. But I think that, and there was so much like frenzied, let's catch up, which was great. At the same time, I think a little of that has died down a little bit, but I don't think that it's completely died down. I think it's more about like, okay, now what? And the now what, I think, is leading to a lot of good conversations, effective conversations that are leading to like action. So I think that's the biggest change.
It's always good when you switch from a reactive to kind of a proactive approach. That's usually when the best things happen. So I think this leads us really nicely into the next part of our conversation. And I've definitely heard tidbits of this across the entire discussion so far, but really what we're talking about today is shortening that chain, right? The chain between advertiser and publisher, because the more steps there are in between those two, the harder it is to understand who you're hitting, and the harder it is for publishers to get data back up to the people who need to know who they're targeting. So interesting to talk about how the industry is going to approach this at scale, right? So Justin, we've heard from you that on a publisher by publisher basis, there's things that you can be doing, but how are we scaling this across, all of the publishers that might be, have a great African-American audience, but are maybe not as big as Black Enterprise, that don't have some of those resources. So I'd love to hear how you guys see the industry shifting in that vein.
Yeah, I mean, there's different initiatives that are in place. I think, one is called Group Black, and they're, pulling together, a bunch of publishers. I think it's run through Essence, and they're doing their stuff there. I myself have my own personal company called Snackable Media, and we rep blacknews.com, blackbusiness.com, blackhistory.com, blackfilm.com, and a couple of my O&O sites. And I also help out doing the Black Enterprise stuff. So that's a personal plug for me. But I think, there's different ways, to just get closer to the publishers, and for us to, be able to pass that data along. A lot of the publishers have a lot of first party data. Black Enterprise, we have over 300,000 email newsletter subscribers. We have over 100,000 push notification subscribers. So there's different ways to use first party data to target, and we can pass that along and layer that into a lot of the campaigns we do, whether it's e-blast or push notifications like I was mentioning. But there's a whole different initiatives that are out there right now on the publisher side to group what we have together. It's not zero sum. We can all win in this, and we're participating in many of those different initiatives to make sure that we bring our number one record leading audience to the table, and as well help the smaller publications who just rely on AdSense. We want to be able to help them monetize better, and to bring their audience to the forefront and have direct advertisers reach them.
Yeah, and I would say that's also an area where Playwire really comes into play as well. No pun intended. We have so many publishers that we work with, and a lot of them just would be too small to by itself, having a direct dialogue, let's say, with Publicis or Starcom or OMD or anybody. But obviously Playwire as a kind of a publisher first centric company helping them with monetization, we can really bridge that gap. Not only do we have direct publisher relationships and very close ones at that, also on the other side, we have very close advertiser relationships. And adding on top of that, we have our own tech stack. And I think that makes us very unique in the industry, that we have kind of those three components that we can really line up and really make sure that we're properly passing information along, that we're classifying publishers right, that we're having these dialogues with the agencies and brands about our content, about our publishers, about our data that we're developing, so that we can really facilitate that media spend according to DE&I. And I think that should be the ultimate goal that we're trying to achieve here.
Yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective, I think the one thing to really, note is that a lot of that first party data, whether it comes from the publisher side or it comes from the brand side, still has the ability to be incorporated. And I think that it really comes from choosing the ability to understand how to celebrate identities. And if we can create that, essentially that mind shift and using, to what Justin said, an infinite game mentality, right? And it really allows us to kind of truly connect these dots in a way that's meaningful. And I think that, our ability to recognize those differences is imperative in order for us to be able to celebrate them, and not being able to stray away from the idea of what that means, but understanding the intentionality of what is used for. So I think that, our approach is to also, make sure that just holistically as an industry, end to end, again, that mutual accountability, that mutual responsibility, so that we're all just driving in that same direction. I think that that's imperative for those solutions to truly stick, right? Because we don't want to undo the momentum that we've been able to capitalize on, going to, I don't remember what you called it, Justin, but a cookie 9.0 or whatever we're doing.
Well, we actually have an audience question that I think fits in really well with the discussion that we're having right here. So I'm going to bring it on up. So as a network that specializes in serving and reaching Indigenous audiences, what can we do to best engage large ad agencies and media strategists so that they understand what differentiates DE&I platforms like us from typical general population channels? So you guys have any advice for Abby? Dear Abby.
So the question is how can the multicultural audience be more prioritized broadly within kind of the agency and ad tech world? Is that it?
I think it's even a little more specific than that. It's that as the network who represents this audience, how can we showcase that using us versus a general pop is a better choice?
Got it. I mean, yeah, go ahead, Carol. No, you take it.
I would say maybe it's not use us instead of. I would say they should position themselves as a complement that is going to double click on that particular resonance with that audience. So if I'm, looking to connect with an Indigenous audience, you're the perfect partner for it, because you're going to give me that credibility and that resonance that, that's going to make my message break through. So I wouldn't say that you're, directly competing with that, general market, partner. But it's more about showcasing how your value and your audience and your, ethos is really going to lend credibility to your brand and your message. So I would say the complement is the sort of way to resonate with the buyer or the strategist that you're engaging with, because your numbers are not going to beat their numbers. And sometimes we just have to get away from that number conversation and just really show the value. And I think value is a undervalued word. So I think, demonstrating that would probably be like a better conversation. But Carlos,
I would also add, it's tough out there. Even Black Enterprise, which has been around since 1970, so like I say, almost 52 years. When you look at the agency side, and that's why I like that a lot of the agencies have been pushing the DEI initiatives in their hiring. It's you want your brand to be top of mind. So when if it's the planning team, the investment team, when they're thinking about where to place these ad dollars, that your brand comes up, or they know the name at least, right? And a lot of what we do at Black Enterprise, even though we've been around so long, is a lot of cold emailing, a lot of discussions, a lot of we're going to be in the new fronts, a lot of digital upfronts, a lot of these different things to get our brand out there, so the different people at the agencies know, okay, this is where to go for this. They're not thinking when it comes time to spend Black dollars, go to BET. BET is owned by Viacom. Black Enterprise is owned by the Graves family. So it's one of those things that, it's like I said, it's difficult, but I like what the agencies are doing in the hiring respect. And when you hire more diverse talent, then they have, they're engaged with your media, so then they know your name and it helps push it out there. If you're a smaller publication, like you say, indigenous publication, it's imperative on you to, I would think, see if you can find a group like Nathan was saying, like Playwire. They have a whole bunch of publishers that they group together, and then they can go to market with and sell through that way. But I think it's best for you to find different groups that you can join and have your inventory there and have it packaged to have more scale, and then advertising be put behind it. So that's the way I would go if I was you.
Yeah, my position is kind of combining both what Carol said and what Justin said, and that know that what you guys have to offer is uniquely you, and that can't be duplicated by these big general market populations. So your audience, you're experts in this space, and being able to capitalize on that versus trying to play into, to your point, competing with these larger entities is your strategic advantage. It's a zig when they're zagging, right? And I think that to also piggyback on what Justin was saying a little bit is that the idea that multicultural audiences are monolithic needs to be demystified. And so whether it's gaming, whether it's sports, entertainment, music, any of these things, the native representation is going to be in any of these categories. There's not a category that is, to be assumed that they wouldn't be in. So I think that, the idea of demystifying that component of these monolithic, if you want to reach a back audience, you have to go to BT. Like, that's not true. There are people consuming content in so many different ways and are interested in so many things. So I would say, like, zig when they're zagging, use your expertise that your audience better than anyone, and being able to capitalize on that non-monolithic component to place the ability to add value, like Carol said, is going to be the win.
Great. And I think this is, segueing right into our final topic, which is essentially, what is the effect for publishers? If I'm a publisher who's a little behind the eight ball, hasn't really started thinking about this yet, maybe I don't have like a really specific audience. How do I start gathering that audience? Maybe I'm one of the, publishers, Carlos, that you were just talking about, where there's a wide variety of people who frequent my site. How can I start to take advantage of that and feed that back up where it needs to go?
I mean, I can start there. I mean, I think, as a publisher, everything begins with understanding your audience, right? And that is not an easy thing to do, as we just discussed, because the data is kind of lacking often. But once you understand your audience, you can also cater to your audience and produce better content for your audience. And as you do that, that should grow, right? Those respective audiences. And hopefully all the initiatives, again, that we're trying to do here will lead to a better media spend based on that representation in the audience. And, obviously as a very small publisher, it's very hard to get all the bells and whistles that you would need on the tech side to build a lot of these things and connect the pipes right and pass the data and so forth. So, again, if you're big enough to do that, great for you, more power to you. If not, again, like Justin was also mentioning, work with someone that can help you, that has your back, so that you can take advantage of this and really get your fair share of these dollars that really should be spent on you.
I guess I'll jump in here real quick. I think that also, like, yes, the technology part can be difficult. It's difficult to understand, even for the larger publishers out there. So, working with a partner is the best way to facilitate that type of, leaving the AdSense world into more of an AdX world, into more of a PMP monetization world. I think that's the first start. If you're just talking about growing traffic, it's all about distribution. So, making sure that you're on all the news aggregators, whether that's Smart News or Flipboard or Newsbreak app. Make sure you're, optimizing everything for SEO. So Google and Bing and Yahoo pick you up. And certainly building up, like I say, first-party information, making sure that you're growing your newsletter list, your push notification list, and there are different partners you can partner with that will make that work for you and help you with the technology there. It's not everything has to be off the shelf or has to cost you money, but at the core of it, and, coming from my background, I used to work at the Daily Mail. It's all about for me, the content creators and journalism and editorial, and making sure that you're investing in that, in writers and content creators, and making sure that they're pushing out the best content for your audience to drive audience gains. And once you see that happen, Black Enterprise has been around for a long time, but we didn't turn into the #1 Black media publication in ComScore by happenstance. It was about investing in people to write and create content and push out things that the audience wants to consume, and that's what got us to where we are. So I always say invest in human capital in that respect, and you'll see your numbers bloom.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was going to say that was literally going to be my response, is to invest in diverse content creators. And I do think that there's clearly like some outages as it relates to tech, but we're also in the most technologically advanced state in our industry that we've ever been. So, the idea of leveraging what we have available to amplify the voices that need it most is imperative for our ability to really curate that messaging that is going to resonate with people, that's driving that right traffic, and also being able to understand that, not being not being adverse to risk, and understanding that non-monolithic, non-traditional people and the exposure that's happening with those people actually can help amplify that voice in different ways because it's coming from a unique perspective. So, expand and diversify your content creators, and also not be afraid to play in spaces that you might not have before, but understanding that multicultural audiences are non-monolithic. It's imperative to be able to play in these spaces using these voices to capitalize on that traffic.
Great. Well, I think this leads us to our open floor. So at this point, if you have questions, we got just a few more minutes left with all of these wonderful brains in one room, or virtual room, if you will. So please throw them in. I have a couple that are lined up, but I want to make sure that the rest of the audience knows now's the time to get them in if you have additional questions. So the first one that I've got here is really specific. Justin, can you repeat the name of your company for one of
Sure.
our participants?
Sorry. So my company is called Snackable Media. You can find it at snackablemedia.com and contact me there. And essentially what it essentially is, there was a point, people came to Black Enterprise and was like, hey, can you help us monetize? It started with video, now it's in display, and can you help us, be a part of your network? And we're very specific. It's kind of like business oriented, but we do lifestyle, we do social justice. And I started working with people at Black News and blackbusiness.com and blackhistory.com and blackfilm.com, like I mentioned. And then I created my own O&O sites called Newsonics, which is a Black news site, and Sis to Sis, which used to be sister2sister.com, and just grouping them together. And now we go to market with that. So we're certainly open to adding people to our network if it makes sense and fits. And we go out there and we pitch them to the agencies like we have here, and they buy into us, and then we give a great rev share percentage to our partners that are part of our network, and we push down that revenue and we push those advertisers to their sites. So that's essentially what Snackable Media does in a nutshell, but it's not too different than even what Playwire does to a certain extent, just a little bit more technology there.
Great. The next question that we have is regarding data collection. So we've talked about a lot of the data that we can collect to use in a positive way to target the people we want. But what are the concerns with using this data in a negative way to exclude people, or take the opposite stance? Because if we're collecting it and we're using it for targeting purposes, there's always going to be ways to use it in the negative. So what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think there's always the possibility with tech and the double-edged sword of its application. But I think, kind of to what Carol said at the top of this conversation, it's in a business's advantage, and it's advantageous for them to utilize this data for good. because even an undercounted census has already indicated huge upticks as it relates to what Leroy was saying, the brownification of America. So, I mean, I don't understand in a certain context what there would be the strategic advantage to deploy that tactic if the data is indicating that this is something you need to do. But I mean, there is opportunity for that malice to happen. It would be remiss to not acknowledge it. But I just think from a business sense, the dollars and cents point that you should be doing that. So most of the time, I would imagine most companies wouldn't necessarily look to exclude to minimize their marketplace presence and to diminish their awareness and lift and all those other brand health metrics. So that's just my perspective.
I mean, I think, two things I would add there. One is just like you might have in the banking sector or mortgages or so, where you're not allowed to deny someone based on race or anything like that. I think maybe that's somewhere where we're going to go or get eventually with the digital advertising space that needs a lot more thought and hopefully better regulations, as we've seen with other data privacy laws, like in Europe, that aren't really functional.
Did we lose Nathan, or is it just me?
Yeah.
Oh, there he is. I think he's coming back.
Yeah.
You might need to repeat like your last sentence or so.
There was some kind of storm here. Yeah, there's some kind of storm going on here, and I was worried that this was going to happen, but I almost made it to the end. So I don't know where I cut off, but I said it will need like certain data laws to get better, and hopefully not like ones that were implemented in Europe, for example, so a little more thought out. And the other thing I wanted to say is, yeah, I think we need to get away a little bit of this, like, I want to include a certain audience or exclude an audience. That's why I like this kind of the lens factor, right? You want to reach everybody, right? In the right way, proportionately. Like, that is the goal. You're not trying to only hit this person or that person. So I think that's kind of a mindset change as well.
Great. Well, that covers all of our open questions that we didn't hit during the discussion. And if anybody else has any additional questions, don't hesitate to reach out. We'll be sending the recording out after this. So if you have any additional questions, you can reply back to that message with them, and we'll make sure we get some answers for you. I wanted to thank all of our presenters for taking an hour out of their busy days to come and have this discussion. And everyone enjoy the rest of their day and upcoming weekend. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, nice to meet everybody. Bye.
Bye.